Many Christians believe that one day there's going to be this great tribulation that comes against all the Christians across the world. But is that what the Bible really says? The Great Tribulation is mentioned in Matthew 24, so let's quickly look at the whole chapter to get some greater understanding. Now, if you notice throughout the whole chapter, Jesus says to the disciples things like, "You will see this, you will see that. Make sure you are not frightened. Beware that you are not deceived." Remember, Jesus is speaking to the disciples here, not to you and not to I. It sounds like Jesus is expecting these things to happen while the disciples are alive. In verse 34, Jesus said, "This generation will not pass until all these things, including the tribulation, take place." Every other time in Matthew that Jesus said this generation, he is always speaking of the people alive back then. Jesus is saying the Great Tribulation was going to happen in the lifetime of the disciples and the people back then. If we look at verses 15 through 16, Jesus says that when they would see the abomination of desolation in the holy place, those in Judea should flee to the mountains. Now, the holy place was the Jewish temple that was in Jerusalem. No other city in the world had or has a Jewish temple. Notice Jesus only warned those in Judea to flee to the mountains. Doesn't Jesus care about the people in Moscow, London, Paris, Beijing, Los Angeles, and Kickapoo, Texas? That's a real town, by the way. And if the tribulation is worldwide, what good would fleeing one area do? Unless Jesus only warned those in Judea to only flee Judea because the tribulation would only happen in Judea. This must be why Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 7 calls the tribulation Jacob's trouble. Jacob is a biblical term for the Jews, not the whole world. What was the Great Tribulation? The Jewish historian Josephus wrote that around the year AD 66, the wicked nations surrounding Judea rebelled against Rome, and all their armies gathered at Judea and Jerusalem. They took over the city, and for 42 months they pillaged and plundered Jerusalem and tortured the Jews that were living there. This is why Revelation 11 verse 2 says that the outer courts of the temple would be trampled for 42 months by the nations. And in Zechariah 14 verses 2 through 3 it says, "I will gather all the nations to fight against Jerusalem. The city will be taken, the houses looted, and the women raped." This was when the wicked nations gathered and pillaged and plundered Jerusalem. Verse 3 says, "Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he has fought in times past." Whenever the Lord went out to fight in times past, it was almost always through a physical military force of another nation. When did this happen? Well, in the year AD 70, after the 42 months of these nations pillaging Jerusalem, the Roman army came and destroyed the city of Jerusalem and squelched these rebellious nations. This was the Lord going out to fight against the nations. This fits perfectly with Zechariah 14 verses 2 through 3, and it all happened in that generation as Jesus said it would. So in conclusion, the Great Tribulation was when the wicked nations surrounding Judea came and pillaged and plundered Jerusalem, tortured the Jews for 42 months before the Romans came and destroyed the city in AD 70. It was only in Judea back in the lifetime of the disciples. It isn't something that's going to happen all across the world in our future. Thanks for watching. God bless.